Thanks for coming in, Kevin. Everyone, we have Kevin Kessinger with MSI Mold Builders, a long-term customer of ours, both for CAD software and then most recently for DriveWorks automation integration software. At this point, I think we're about the 2-year mark of MSI implementing DriveWorks and putting it through the paces and living the life of what automating and integrating is all about. So it seems like a good time to check in and just understand how all that's gone. What's the reality of your implementation? But not just that, want to understand some more of the background. How did we get here to begin with? Mm-hmm. What about the company and what it's trying to achieve was led you to this point, in effect. So
for MSI, it was an identified need to capture some knowledge of of an aging workforce, specifically myself and a few other people that were looking at an upcoming retirement. Mm-hmm. So we had to take a hard look at what it is that those people knew and what it was that the people that were going to be stepping in had a firm grasp of. And we identified that there was some tribal knowledge. We didn't have everything documented. We have great documentation, process, procedures, work instructions, things like that. But in our industry, in the plastic injection mold building industry, there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of needing to need for the understanding of scale. When do part sizes transition when you go from a mold that's 16 by 16 inches to 70 by 120 inches. Mm-hmm. There's some significant changes that take place when you're dealing with large molds, and MSI builds large molds, but we also build the small molds that those plastic parts complement each other. We tend to do packages of molds, and we needed to identify that nuance. That was now that occurred probably first quarter 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. So we identified this issue.
It was like a moment, like it's just an aha moment, or is this something that was brewing over time and it's a couple-year process to come to the conclusion that this is something you have to deal with?
So I think in our industry, every mold maker has mold building standards. And if I was building up an injection mold for MSI, I would build it a certain way. We like our molds a certain way. But we're a custom mold builder, and we have hundreds of customers, and each of those customers have specific ways they want their molds mm-hmm. built. And it's even more convoluted than that. There's molders that mold for other customers, and the molder has a specification, and then the customer has a specification. And we're really the only entity that knows what our customers want, because
perhaps more so than the customer themselves.
Even with, some customers are really in tune to what their standards are, but there's just a lot of ambiguity, and some of these things are very important to customers, and some they will change their own standard on the fly. Mm-hmm. And it's not, we're not allowed to have an excuse that we didn't know. We have to know. We have to have all that documented. So we have customer standards, and we have MSI standards.
Yeah, so as if it weren't a challenge enough to manage the information that your own company needs to run itself, but it behooves you to take that responsibility on behalf of your customers too. Because when you sell a mold for 6 figures plus and ship it across the country and they go to hook it up and use it, something's not right. At that point, it doesn't matter whose mistake it was. it's a giant problem, and it will end up on your lap somehow, some way, right?
We consider it our mistake.
Yeah.
You know, we that's one of the, MSI's, our statement is that we are our customers' competitive advantage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we know what the customer, we pride ourselves on knowing what the customer wants and needs, and giving that to them without really asking. Now, with that said, there are certain people in the company, that have 25, 30 years of experience dealing with these customers, and they know those standards like the back of their hands. Our project managers for the individual customers that they handle know their customers, what their requirements are. But not everything is documented. Customers send us design specifications. MSI has a design standard, but our designers, what they were doing was before they began the design of a mold, they would go and they would review the customer's design specification, and they would find that there were holes in it. Things weren't identified.
Either conflicts or missing information, or the full requirement wasn't stated.
More missing information. Yeah. And then what we would do in those instances is we would plug in what MSI would do. The MSI specification is, it is very thorough. But some customers just put in the things that are really important to them, and then the rest. So we have a designer, in some cases, a designer with maybe 5 years of experience that doesn't have the full breadth of what the customer requirements are, and it's not documented. It's not shown. Somebody's got to remember that, and that's what we felt like we needed a mechanism that would introduce that information to us immediately, and then have a design process that, as we went step by step by step, the customer's requirement would materialize in front of the designer as they went through a checklist. And that was the idea. That was the original. What is this going to be? Now, there was another component, in that is our quoting tool. And if there is anybody in the audience that's a plastic injection mold builder or a company that does a very specific thing, and that specific thing is always different, but it's the same thing. Quoting, your quoting doesn't fit into any software that's available. You basically have to customize.
Solution, right?
Yeah, you basically have to customize your own software. And MSI had done that. We did that a long time ago, 1995. It's like 29 years ago. And the software is 29 years old. Now it's been updated.
Are you
with
referring
pricing.
to like an ERP system, or
I'm specifically referring to Encompass, and Encompass 9.5,
which is your ERP,
which is our ERP.
Right. But you've heavily customized it over time to match your
Correct.
needs, right?
Correct. And it was always our director of sales vision, and this has been his vision for about 7 years, and he's talked about it at good length, was that we have we literally have 50 years of data, and electronic data, going back to the early 90s, and that is all in that system. And we made some business system changes in the early 2000s. So we identified 15 years of mold building where we had data for how many hours we used for each different type of component, and we knew the sizes of these things, and we knew what our costs were, and we had all this data. How could we access that with a quote system? And the director of sales' idea was that we'd like to use a third-party algorithm, a little bit of AI. And his thought was visionary, that AI before AI was a thing, but it is now. Mm-hmm. And we started using decision tree,
logic,
right?
Yeah.
And algorithm, and we contracted with a third party to produce this. That was an implementation and a feat all in its own. But we identified these two things: information. Put information at the fingertips of a designer, and a quote tool.
Yeah. So in other words, I mean, MSI's been at it for decades. You've got all this historical data. How an injection molding tool set is produced is pretty much the same. It's material and machine time, and like the elements that go into creating a quote. Nothing novel there, right? But hey, why instead of creating a quote from scratch every time, let's use our historical data, which you have an abundance of, to come up with a quote for the next tool. That's the short.
And by the way,
goal.
It's not a secret. We quote for a lot of companies, and a lot of our customers are competing with each other. But customer A might want a quote, and their requirements are this set of data.
Oh, so you'll have two customers who are competing against each other, in effect?
And they get quotes based on their requirements.
Right.
So some customers have very strict requirements of material types, sizes, components, and it drives a cost. And another customer might not be as stringent, but their cost could be slightly different. And you
got to keep all that straight.
You got to keep all that straight, and your quote should update with the customer name, not go through and redo the quote and redo all those little pieces that are different between the two. We simply have a set of data for building a mold, and this one's for customer A, and it calculates, and this one's for customer B, and it calculates.
So quoting is a thing, but can we contextualize or quantify, like, why do something about it? So what we see in manufacturing in particular is, if you're winning 25% of the jobs that you quote, you're like ecstatic, right? Sometimes it's down to 10% or 5% or less, right? So there's this very common notion in business that the majority of your quoting activity ends up being waste, like at the end of the day, right? So
there's a tremendous amount of waste. Yeah. That was one of the. I'm probably not going to give away our matrix, but it was significant. It was a lot.
From a dollar, did you put a dollar value?
We had a dollar value. We had a dollar value, and it worked. It worked very well into the ROI of this solution. Identifying how long we took quoting, and how many people were quoting, how much of their day was quoting, and what percentage of those quotes were we being awarded business, and then if you haven't done a good job on the front end, once it's business, it's tough to go back and
so getting a price out the door is one thing, but once that needs to churn, the job is accepted and that has to turn in an order that you have to act against. That's a whole nother can of worms, but it's the same fundamental data set that fuels both needs.
Right, but if you had tremendous accuracy between your quote and the shop order, if there were no surprises, if that's a win as well.
Yeah,
that's a win as well.
Yeah,
the last thing you want to do is get into the job and see how it was quoted, and then understand this customer requires the Cadillac of hot material delivery systems, and it wasn't quoted.
Right.
That would be that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right. So at the end of the day, we're talking about managing data, right? And that's what we see across industry. I think a universal challenge in running a business is, how do you manage data well? How do you make it available? How do you communicate data across departments or individuals? How do you manage the changing nature of data, like like a revision process, for example? And that applies to anyone, whether you're a health insurance company or a fruit distributor or a grocery store around the corner. Like, everyone at the end, no matter what you literally sell, whatever goes out the door when someone buys something from you, you're still managing data, right? And so now we conclusively see that manufacturing customers have a very particular data challenge. But it's one thing if you manufacture widgets. So if you're just making a plastic cup and you make them thousands a day and you put it in a box and ship it with a label, that pales in comparison to making a product that is literally different every time you make it.
Right. You make that plastic cup in 1,000 different configurations.
And not even like a known number of configurations,
right.
Like new configurations every day. And so you could think of products like doors or windows or tables, furniture. Like those products are configurable by size, maybe color, maybe material. Do you want a bifold door or a single door? So that level of management is really just managing options. Like how many options do you have? Make sure these options don't conflict. But basically, the user just needs to say, I want this particular outcome. Let's make sure they get to that outcome, and let's make sure we produce it right and ship it. But your product is even more involved with that, because
it's every conceivable plastic part that you've ever seen.
Right.
And how do you put the steel around it to produce a cavity that you can squirt plastic
So it is
into.
configurable. Like that the part that comes out of the tool is different. The tool set itself, there's characteristics that apply every time, right? But I can imagine that there's caveats at every step, nuances to every decision, and the information that you need to have available to you to process all this correctly comes from various places, right?
Correct.
So that's where the data, like all this information coming from various sources, and you need all that data to intersect at the right person's hands at the right time. So yeah, I think we're just saying that it's a data challenge.
We found ourselves with, I think at last count, I think it was 38 spreadsheets, 38 pages,
So that's
38 sheets.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to unpack a bit. So rewind the clock to what you said 3 years ago, when there was like this moment in the company where it was recognized that, there's all this data and we've been managing it fine, I suppose, over the years. But if you actually go and find where that data lives, it's going to be in various places. ERP here, Excel over there, a binder over here on the shelf that everyone uses. But how much of it was actually in people's heads?
Right.
Like a scary amount? The majority?
Well, those sheets we had, they were all linked, and ideally you only had to fill in certain pieces of information once, and it propagated through all the sheets.
You're talking about like an Excel file? Yeah.
But there were individual pieces of information that somebody had to know or be looking up as they filled it out. There was one mold design specification that had 103 fields, and I think 13 of them automatically propagated, but everything else was drop-down menus or choose from, that type of thing. And a project manager had to know the answers to these other 89 questions, and it was cumbersome. It was time consuming.
Yeah.
And that's one of the items that we identified. You said something interesting. Mold, or products that just change in size, length, width, and things like that. Molds are actually very much like that. we have slides, we have lifters, we have a cavity and a core, we have stripper plates, we have, the components, they're very much the same every time.
Sure.
It's just the part face changes.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we drive the CAD that creates these components that are very similar all the time? How do we choose the proper material? How do we change the wear surfaces? What do we do? And those are all from standards. So that was another component in the beginning, is how do we automate the design process of these standard components, so that all we're doing is taking away the part face in an area, in an interface type area, but the shape of the component is to a standard.
Yeah. So that sounds like a different focus area than just simply making your quoting process more efficient, less error prone, things like that. You're now talking about downstream.
Right.
You just think of it as time saving benefits, or like what's like the underlying need there?
Time saving, able to put components on the shelf that only needed part face put on them, because you could just drop them in. They were always the same. But it was the aspect of this thing that we identified as the hardest thing to do.
From like an institutional knowledge standpoint.
From an institutional knowledge, and for finding a piece of software that could automate that.
Right.
That was the trigger to go find a product that could automate CAD to a design standard. That was the beginning. That was the beginning. That how do we put a list of standards in and have an automation software build this item? And we didn't want to see the canned demos from anybody.
Mm-hmm.
The canned demos always worked. We wanted somebody to take one of our designs and automate the production of that.
Yeah. So before we get into potential solutions, just a few more questions on like the build-up phase of this. So meanwhile, in all this, your role is like director of engineering.
At that time, I was director of engineering.
So I imagine like you had your own interests in doing things better, faster, more robustly. Where else in the organization was there a push to be better? So we talked about quoting. You spend so much quoting to win so little. Like that just doesn't make sense. So I imagine there was like sales manager
The director of sales
yeah.
was pushing the quote portion of the project. Really, that was his eye was on that piece of the puzzle. Our COO, he really wound this whole thing up and directed the search, because he identified the transitions that were about to happen. He and I are in the exact same we're the exact same age, and we're in the exact same boat for retirement. Mm-hmm. He knew what was coming, and identified this early on, that this had to be. And it's not just that it seems like it was the only reason that drove this, but the truth is, for any company, how much of your knowledge is documented,
right?
And searchable and presentable instantly,
actionable somehow.
Yeah,
right.
It's amazing how much isn't. We didn't even realize how big this was going to get.
Yeah. So is that like at the highest level the phenomenon that drove everything? Right.
I think
and
so.
So was there a point where the sales take on that issue and the engineering take on the issue were treated as two separate problems that would probably have their own solutions, their own separate ways of dealing with it?
In the beginning, it's interesting. You were there. In the beginning, they were very separate. Mm-hmm. One, the sales director was going to take his portion of the project and take care of that, and then I was going to take the engineering design portion of the project and move that along. They were separate.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't stay separate,
right?
But they began separately.
Yeah. And what if it weren't for ultimately choosing DriveWorks? What options? How did one conceive of solving the quoting challenge?
Well, it was.
What else would you do? Would you look for ERP to take this on, or custom code it, or
It was.
I mean, you were using Excel, and that got you going. In fact, well, by the way, how long was the Excel file around? Was that like years in the making?
I think the original mold design spec sheet came out in probably about 99.
There you go.
And it might not have been electronic in 99. It might have been a form that we printed and we filled out.
Right.
And I will just say that this Excel, this very specific job paperwork Excel spreadsheet, went from that to this 38 sheet linked up Excel file, just
right.
a normal Excel file that would take about 33 seconds to open every time you opened it. And if you made it editable by multiple users, it was even slower.
Right. I mean, we see all the time that companies use Excel as the solution to fill the gaps amongst their other systems, right? So whether it's ERP, CRM,
that's accurate.
You need to collect information somewhere, right? You need to aggregate it on a per job basis. You need to make it shareable, and you want to standardize how you do that. So what else are you going to use? You have Excel. Everyone has Excel. Just fire up a spreadsheet and pile more and more on over the years, which is better than nothing, right? I mean, it got you, 20 years of progress.
Yeah, it was it worked. It was just slow, and it was personnel input intensive, and the same thing over and over, but with different pieces of data going into each of the fields, because you had to know the customer.
Right. So I presume that there wasn't intelligence built into the thing such that, I don't know, if you enter a certain width of a part and you choose this material, there's a conflict there. It's not going to highlight, hey, you better not choose what you just chose. So in effect, you're relying on the user to have all the knowledge. And where's all that knowledge? In their heads.
Right.
So you're kind of back to the same
fundamental
problem.
And there were, intelligent drop-down menus that if it was, if it was a glass-filled material, we would choose a more resilient metal to build the mold out of.
So there's some logic built into
it. There was good logic. It's just that there were a good number of fields you just had to know the answers for that specific customer.
Right. So was there a culminating event or moment where the company said, all right, well, we've got the sales and we've got this engineering, we've got these two challenges, 1, 2, 3, go, let's solve? Or like, how did you get to the point of action and saying, we are going to do something about this and start that part of the journey?
I think the decision is we're going to find a solution for this. Go find the players that could provide us solutions. Go find products. Start investigating what's out there. What can, we can't be the only company on the face of the planet that has this
Far
issue.
from it. No, not at all.
And we weren't.
And was there a pretty broad, like, executive sponsorship of this? Like,
I think the senior management group was on board.
Yeah,
I would say, and I think that was key too. By the way, the senior management group all believed that we need to do something about this.
I mean, at some level, was there like an existential aspect of this, like, in order to be competitive in the future, we must ... or or was it not quite that dramatic or extreme of a moment? It's just like just trying to be operationally better.
Operationally better, but speed and price, I mean, it's getting more and more and more demanding.
Right.
So we have, even quoting, you've got customers that, they've got an opportunity they want to quote right now.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you can provide a quote in minutes rather than hours or days, you have an advantage.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so the company comes to the point where it's decided, okay, we're going to do something about this. Then what? Like, did you have ideas of where to look? I mean, where?
Well, I knew.
You search the internet for help me run my business better. Like, where do you go from there?
Well, my component was CAD.
Yep.
So we're a Pro E and SolidWorks company. We were looking into to the Siemens product. We didn't take off the table a complete revamping of engineering. We
pursue the automation agenda.
The automation. Yeah. So Siemens had a product, PTC had a product, TPM, SolidWorks had a product.
Mm-hmm.
We contacted all three. We got quotes from all three. We looked at demonstrations of capability from all three.
So you went through like a full discovery process. For
we did
multiple solutions, okay.
And we got pricing. We identified pros and cons. We had things we could live with, things we couldn't. I know you said don't do rah TPM, but you're the only company that stepped in and said, hey, how about if we show you how this works on your product?
Mm-hmm.
That
so
was
it was a departure from the traditional demo.
Yeah, the pilot,
experience.
The pilot program that was, presented. The management group just, I remember the meeting. We just looked at each other like, wow, nobody's offering to do something like this.
Mm-hmm.
Let's have a look at this.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was less than 40 hours.
Yeah.
I think it was something like that. It was we're getting ready to spend, the quotes we had on the table were, in the very beginning, I think it was, the low end was $300,000. The high end was $1.7 million.
Yeah. And
we had to buy software, on top of that. So, the idea of spending 40 hours to see if this was really what we wanted to do, it wasn't a difficult decision. We pulled the trigger on that pretty quick.
Yeah. So in your case, this CAD automation initiative led itself to a point where there would be adoption of a major business, call it a major business system, that would be up there with other systems like ERP if you had a CRM. So this was not going to be some like point solution to some point problem. Like this is going to be a bigger thing that required investment and planning and really very careful consideration of implementation, right? So the realities of implementation if you're going to spend six figures plus on something, you really want to make sure that it's going to work. You know how it's going to go down, how long is it going to take, all these things matter at that level, right? So
lots of flow charts,
yep.
Lots of getting feedback from prospective users on what the must-haves, the like-to-haves, the wish we had type input.
And so at this moment where you're considering an enterprise solution, the quintessential challenge is that you as the customer and us as the software provider and the vendor and the implementation partner, we don't know what we don't know, right? We know our software, we know how to use it.
Oh.
And we have a general sense of what you're trying to accomplish, but we don't know your product. So, and then meanwhile, you know what you're trying to accomplish, but you don't get the software. So
that's interesting.
That's like this.
We were very in tune with what. I mean, it was Joel. It was you. We were very well aware that you knew nothing about mold designs. Mm-hmm. You were. You knew the manufacturing process, mm-hmm. but the actual details, and we really didn't know the full breadth of DriveWorks. I mean, we really thought it was CAD automation.
Yeah, that's make the drawings go quicker, please.
Yeah,
sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's really it. How do and I think you started that pilot program in July 8th or something like that, mm-hmm. and the deliverable was the first week of August, and we chose a component, a very standard component, a slide, mm-hmm. and
so if the overall tooling set is like this, we chose
a component
portion of it
that we wanted the user, the designer, to simply input some basic dimensions, choose the style, where wear plates go, how Gibbs made it up to the part, angle pins, or if it was hydraulic, or a bunch of menu items, and then DriveWorks would go search at that time it was just tables, mm-hmm. Search tables and put in this information, and it would generate it would generate a preview that was kind of they're not going to know the vernacular, but it was
on the screen you could see a graphical rendering of what
right.
the thing that you just
a 3D
yeah.
preview that
yeah.
was roughly the size, mm-hmm. And if it looked good to you, you could hit a button that said generate, and it would build the CAD. And I think it built that slide in about a minute,
right?
Something like that. Like I think it was 68 seconds or something like that. It was we benchmarked that. I actually spent time benchmarking that, and I probably haven't visited that since.
Yeah,
because that's the smallest thing that DriveWorks does. It's not about the CAD. It probably took me a year to figure that out. That it's not about the CAD. It's everything else.
Right. Yeah. So back to this point, when a business is contemplating a meaningful investment into a business system, whether they acknowledge it or not, they don't know what they don't know about the solutions they're considering. The vendor can only know so much about the customer. So there's an impasse, right? That either you eventually get all the information you want, or you ultimately don't make a decision. There's like analysis paralysis, or the effort just goes away because the moment feels so unclear that the business never has the confidence to make the investment, right? They just can't be sure they're going to get what they want out of it. Or you can actually learn what you need to know. And I think that's what was valuable about that pilot exercise is it was your opportunity to get involved in a setting that you could relate to, a real-time occasion to ask all the questions, see everything by example. Yeah, we studied this like microcosm of your much larger design challenge, and we did so just enough that you could start to connect the dots on your own, mm-hmm. right? And maybe didn't have like 100% certainty in how this would ultimately go down, but you had enough.
If I put a percentage on what I learned during the pilot program about DriveWorks, I would say I learned 3 to 5% of capability
of what it could ultimately
do,
right?
And was impressed with the 3 to 5, enough that we made a decision. But I think that having that 30-day delivery on the pilot program being 40 hours, I knew that you were gonna run the pilot program, so we knew you were gonna be doing probably about 10 hours a week, mm-hmm. The decision was made to be supportive of you, while you were in that 10-hour period each week. I think we spent a lot of time on Teams. We spent a lot of time in the same conference room. But getting you, having somebody that had the answers to, you knew what you could do. What do you want done? I know how, that's kind of how it went. I know what I can build. I know how I can make this thing build stuff. What do you want built? And what is your nomenclature? And what is your, what are your requirements? What's the key, what are the key pieces that you have to be aware of when you're designing one of these things?
And also the thing about DriveWorks, and much like Excel, in your prior experience with Excel, is you're not just evaluating, okay, can this software do something we need it to do? You're also assessing, can we actually do this ourselves? Like, can we own our own destiny? Can we build out the implementation and own it and maintain it over time? Because was it in the cards to just offload this altogether to a vendor to just have a turnkey solution and here you go, hope it works?
I think we discussed that. I'm recalling, hey, if he can do the slide, they can do, and I think, I think in the decision, I don't think we really decided on that. TPM was there offering to help in any way. But I think that with the initial, once we pulled the trigger, the idea is that I would go to training and learn how this thing happened. How did they do all of this? Because if you remember, the demonstration of that pilot program was in front of the whole company.
Right.
It was at an annual meeting, and I took inputs from the crowd for length, width, height, material. We built that thing right in front of the people with their inputs for a customer they chose, and it built that slide to that customer specifications in less than 70 seconds.
Yeah, so there's a seeing is believing is a big part of that.
They were very impressed. The designers were very impressed.
So how did, so far you've talked about the engineering related aspect of the evaluation process. So how did this become the tool to solve sales needs as well? Or was there an aha moment of some kind? Or
at the same time that I was doing the pilot program, our director of sales was shopping software companies that could write a routine that would take our historical data, identify the complexity of the part for the different sides, top, bottom, left, right, front, back, and assign a value in hours to the requirements for producing those elements, and spitting out hours, not cost.
Oh, okay.
But hours. How many hours will it take to produce that element?
Which is only one component of your pricing.
Which was one component of the pricing, but
helpful, but not the complete.
But the idea is that once we had the estimated hours for each of these things, then we would introduce those hours to DriveWorks and create a document that would apply, a cost matrix and produce a dollars, at $1 per hour for the different machining centers, and the way that we would produce a quote.
So you came to envision that there'd be some form of integration between DriveWorks and this kind of black box system that you would have built out.
Right. And we demonstrated that in the pilot program too by releasing a document. We knew that we could input. I didn't know how it was going to be through a JSON file. I didn't know that it would be. I didn't know how it would happen.
Yeah, we just sent dummy data to the pilot program, and it did something with it.
Right. And then we demonstrated that it could identify that the user could override some requirements, and that it would identify that out of specification thing, and it would send an email to the manager for approval. We proved out
just
a
to be
lot
clear,
of
your Excel file that you used before did not send emails to managers for approval, right?
No.
So
we put a lot into that pilot program. What do we want to? I think it was kind of hinky what we did. We said that we couldn't use aluminum or something on a glass filled material, and you wouldn't. But we said, if the user forces that, then make DriveWorks send an email to the project manager saying, you may want to take a look at this.
Right.
We're this isn't our standard.
So in one deliverable, we had examples of not just automating the production of CAD content and other content that you want out of a quoting process, but there's a form, right? And any old user, a salesperson, could just enter values into a form, hit a button to kick all that off. And furthermore, there's guardrails, right? So we give, because of the form and the underlying logic and everything else, there's a guided process, right? But still, we give the user flexibility to do something different. Mm-hmm. But if we do, we have a guardrail in place to
at least notify somebody that has a little bit more experience to put some eyes on that.
And so it's those types of things. With the Excel solution, you basically just have a way to collect data, mm-hmm. but it doesn't do anything beyond that, right? So the total workflow of what you're trying to accomplish has no real home, and all the ancillary activities they live in like a manager's day-to-day work life, right? I mean, that's the only place where that sort of thing gets handled.
We called it tribal knowledge,
right?
And you called it, where is the single source of truth?
Right. It's just information. It needs to go somewhere.
And right. Where, how do you get it out of everybody's pocket and into a place that's where you go for this information. And that's what we learned in the pilot program, that was we needed that.
Yeah. Now, when you were looking, so you said there are 3 solutions on the table. Obviously, you went with DriveWorks ultimately, but when you kind of looked at the landscape of offerings out there,
it came down to price. It came down to comfort. Mm-hmm. It came down to working with a company that we had been working with for 20 years. Mm-hmm. You're our VAR for SolidWorks. Mm-hmm. This is the part you told me not to do, but our support has been excellent. Mm-hmm. And we have another VAR. Back when we started this, SolidWorks VARs were very territorial, mm-hmm. so we have multiple locations in the country. So we had other VARs that we didn't get that level of support. And matter of fact, TPM stepped up and helped us when it wasn't even TPM's seat. Yeah. Just because you just gave us the solutions.
Yeah. Well, we're happy to be there for moments like those, but I think what this really says is that when a business has to make a decision of this magnitude, trust that things will ultimately work out is a big part of that. Is mm-hmm. that kind of, there's like the emotional side of decision making that's pretty important, not just an ROI.
It was, I would, I'll be brutally honest. Price had a lot to do with the decision we made.
So I take it DriveWorks was
DriveWorks
appealing
was
compared to the alternatives.
DriveWorks was right in line with one of your competitors, but much less expensive than Siemens.
Okay.
And we didn't own NX. We didn't own those, and we were looking at having to change over to 20 seats of NX. It was a little pricey.
Sure.
And the training involved. So being able to stay with the SolidWorks platform was appealing to have this done in a piece of software that we were very familiar with. And a lot of our customers design in SolidWorks, so keeping everything in that world was advantageous.
Okay. So when it came to actually making a decision, was that by committee, or did certain individuals or parts of the business have more sway? Or
I think ownership had the ultimate, yes or no. We have an advisory board that was involved. We made a presentation to the advisory board, but I think ultimately it was ownership. And but the senior management staff presented, ownership presented to the advisory board, and I think if it wasn't unanimous, I would be surprised.
Right. And how much of that was rooted in the fact that DriveWorks could deal with engineering and sales? Was that that is a kind of a 1-2 punch? Was that?
Yeah, it was
the factor?
It was you've got a slide that shows all the different interfaces that DriveWorks can hook up to. Mm-hmm. That was a great slide, mm-hmm. because there's nothing untrue about that slide. It integrates seamlessly with all of those things. That was a big deal, because we saw, as time went by, even before we pulled the trigger in training, as time went by, that scope of work, those ideas were changing and evolving and getting more complex. Nothing like it is today. It was still pretty in its infancy, mm-hmm. but it certainly has grown.
Yeah. So for the audience's benefit, we at TPM, we talk about DriveWorks having these kind of three main areas of functionality. Most folks come to learn about DriveWorks in the context of engineering. They want to save time in their department, or they want to try to institutionalize the engineering activity, right? So ultimately, all that manifests itself in the SolidWorks output, right? So if your product is assembled correctly and the drawings are done right, then the engineering function of the business has done its thing, right? So how do we save time in that realm? And that's because DriveWorks was, when it was founded, it was the founder on day one just sought out to literally just save time on drawings. Drawings are tedious. No one likes to do them. It's easy to make mistakes. To institute drawing standards is a pain. So that's kind of the very core DNA of DriveWorks was born out of, let's make a designer's life a little bit easier every day, mm-hmm. right? And a lot of DriveWorks' pedigree was building towards, hey, if you can do it with a mouse in SolidWorks, let's see how we can automate that.
I think another piece of it is that DriveWorks designs properly. It puts, that top-down, the sequence of events, mm-hmm. are much more disciplined. They're always going to be the same way.
That's however you say it needs to be.
Yeah, right. And you can really get a handle on your your relations, your in context modeling. You can really drive complexity out of your designs so that they function much quicker. They'll rebuild. I'll never forget that slide that DriveWorks created, rebuilt in less than a second. Our library slide, that exact same slide,
modeled one?
the manually modeled one, would take like 15 seconds to rebuild if you made a change to it. Which adds up. If you're a designer and you're working with a slide for 6 hours and you rebuild it, 3 times a minute, or make it easy 4 times a minute, you just wasted a minute. So that 3 hours was really an hour and a half, because you spent a lot of time just rebuilding your model.
So it turns out that that's one of the 3 main functional areas of DriveWorks. So it's really about making the engineer's day go by better. That's fine. Then the second element is, well, in accomplishing that CAD automation, what we've really done is institutionalize your design process. And I don't want to say we're not dumbing it down, but we're reconstituting it into literally a form, or into a format that a user just needs to enter values, right? And it turns out you don't necessarily have to have an engineer enter those values. Why not have a salesperson enter those values, or your customer even? Right?
That's an element of this that did follow on. We started talking about, mold designing is a very specialized field.
Right.
You can't get a mold designer out of your local community college. And I imagine there are a lot of companies in industries where you can't just get one of your engineers out of
any old mechanical engineer can't just step in and do the job.
Exactly.
Right?
And so by having this be menu driven, they had to have a basic knowledge of how this works, but all the pieces that they could really mess up on got done automatically. And now where does this component go? We have, for our mold-based creation, it takes a look at the size of the part, what goes around it. It sizes the mold base appropriately. It puts in the right size components, the right type of fasteners, the right type of leader pins, bushings, return pins. It does all that for you. There's no more discussion on, last time we built a mold this size, it had 7 bolts in each rail, but does this one need 8? That it was always subjective. Now it's in a table, and it takes into account the weight of the tool, the size, it makes a decision for you.
Right. So if that's the case, then why can't we push that upstream? And so let's take everything you just described and put it into a browser, like you can and thereby access it from anywhere by anyone, let's say with a login. Create some half decent UI, like a form that even I could understand and fill out with some prompts and all. And now all of a sudden we've exposed all that functionality to others in your organization, right? Yeah. And so that's where we get into what we call the second pillar of DriveWorks, is all things configurator, or even it might just be dubbed a sales configurator. Sometimes it's called CPQ. But once it's automated, this doesn't have to be an engineering function anymore.
Yeah,
we can shrink the benefit. Well, how do I say this? Extend the benefit of that to someone else, right?
Yeah. You see DriveWorks more often than you think you see. If you're investigating whether to use DriveWorks or not, you would be amazed at how often you've already used it.
Right,
without knowing about it, because it's out there. Yeah. Number of companies, it is out there. But that's even, that was even a discussion. We're taking time to quote. What if a customer just wants a budgetary quote? Can they log on to their secure portal and the idea was, can we write this for Android and iOS?
Could web-based and you can do whatever you want.
Could we have a customer do their own quote, budgetary, but they could get an idea of what their mold size would be and what components went into it, and that's I think we're on 2.0 right now. That might be 3.0. That might be coming. Yeah. We're constantly identifying new things that DriveWorks can, the information is all there. Now how do we, how else can we use it?
Right.
It's pretty easy now.
Kind of is a good segue into the third and final, what we call pillar of DriveWorks, and that's, we literally, I think you said everything else, that's literally what we call it. We've come up with no better term or moniker to describe this type of capability other than it does all the other things that you need done in your business. So, if we think back to your,
it sounds like the easy button, but it isn't the easy button. It does it,
right.
But I'm just always surprised that it can be linked up to so many different things. It can be what
you want it to be.
It really does. It
right.
really does.
So if you think about the things that your Excel file didn't do, like, if someone made a couple of selections that were in conflict or went against your standard or your policy, it emails the manager, and then it maybe even freezes that quote at a step in the workflow until the manager approves it. Then right? So it's all this like other stuff that is, again, what other business system is going to take care of that for you? Is your ERP going to step in and make sure that the material doesn't conflict with the dimension, which conflicts with the injection molding fluid? Like, no. Your purchasing system? Does Microsoft have a product? No. So where else are you going to do that, right? And I think that's what a lot of businesses are coming to realize, is that there's all this process and workflow stuff that just kind of happens because people tend to know what to do. But that gets back to relying on your veterans, right, who have built up this totality of experience that causes them to know what to do. And hopefully they all get together and work well together and things generally go fine. But even with that, mistakes happen. Right?
It's interesting. I remember you just triggered a thought in my mind that happened very, very early on. You used to say to me, articulate what you want to have happen.
In plain English. Preferably.
In plain English, or just articulate the steps that you would physically take to make what you're talking about happen. And it was as simple as, well, I would copy this line of information, I would paste it into this other document, I would do, and I would present it here, and I would evaluate that piece of information against this set of similar information, and I'd make a choice. That kind of thing. If you could articulate what it is that you wanted to do, DriveWorks can do it.
Right.
Yeah. I became infinitely aware of how much it could do.
Right. Yeah. That's actually a good segue into, let's dive a bit more. So far we've had a nice recount of the history. We dove into this the whole evaluation process and what kind of enabled you to zero in on one particular solution, and we've started talking about what the solution, what DriveWorks is. Let's shift gears and talk about the implementation itself. So we did a pilot with you. Your executive team made a decision to move forward with DriveWorks. You took training, and then 1, 2, 3, go. Let's go back to the very beginning of that part of the story, and what I think people will be particularly interested to hear about is there's some form of evolution, right? And I think it's foolish to look at any big implementation and think it's going to be like this straight journey from A to B. Right? There's going to be twists and turns.
No, it's A to BF. It's through the alphabet and a couple times.
Going every which direction. So that's, again, that's why implementations there's no easy button for this sort of thing. And that's all predicated on the fact that you just don't know what you don't know. Right. And so, all right. So day one.
So day one, I distinctly remember me wanting the thing to be pretty and you wanting the thing to work.
Mm-hmm. But is this in the where we focused on SolidWorks automation at that time?
I think,
or was there a different
I think
agenda?
I was working on, I think the very first thing that we worked on was the quote interface, because our director of sales needed, he needed some inputs for the software company that was going to be doing the quote, the parallel path thing. So I think the very first thing we worked on was the basic inputs going to this software company, how to put out that JSON. They wanted the information in JSON format. So I learned how to build a schema. I learned all the things that go into doing that,
managing that kind of data.
So I wrote an interface. We set up our web page. We used certain, I don't know how technical you want me to be here, but what integration theme, and we picked, were we going to use IIS? What were we
kind of infrastructure of provisioning a website,
right?
Effect,
and how to make it stretch and fit your screen and all the things that you would do if you were building a website. We did that first,
right? Because I think with the pilot proved that yes, we can automate SolidWorks all day long. Like we got deep and wide enough into that space that we proved it. But I think you then came to recognize, well, that's great that we can do that, but that's not actually step one.
Right.
Like we can't automate this thing until we can tell it what to automate. How do we tell it what to automate? We need a form.
Right.
Well, wait, hold on. Who's going to make the inputs in the form? It's a salesperson. Okay, so it turns out you actually need all this UI in place.
And that was
to gather the information and do it well, such that by the time you go to automate your CAD, it's getting good data.
Yeah.
Right?
And I would say, lessons learned on that is, if you think you spent enough time on it, spend a little more, because that really nailing down that UI portion of what's going to ultimately be your total implementation, there's a lot of repeating going on. You can variabilize so much of that. You can put so much of that into a group table and ultimately put it into SQL or some database. Thinking that through in the very beginning, it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was painful changing it later, but it was monotonous.
Yeah.
It was time consuming, going through and variabilizing everything that could have been done, and you don't know to do it unless you know to do it. Now I don't do anything until I set up that infrastructure.
Right.
And then, by the way, we had to get that approved. What's gonna be forward facing, what's not, what's gonna be internal, how do we want it to look, what are your colors, what is your button style, all of those things.
Yeah.
It's amazing how nobody cares about it until it's on a computer screen.
That's right. And so I would say a very common theme with a lot of our customers' implementations. Well, first of all, it's very common for the implementation to be done by an engineer or someone of a similar background, like a technical background, knows a lot about the product, knows a lot about what they're trying to accomplish by using software. And so they develop the system and then they hand it off to someone else, like a salesperson. They're like, ta-da, it works, go for it. And they learn pretty quickly, like, oops, should have probably considered the user, my end user. Mm-hmm. What is their experience going to be? How are they going to interpret all this? So it turns out that most engineers can't just put something in front of salespeople and it just works the way that the salesperson would want it to. It's kind of like, you don't tell your wife what to do, right? You learn pretty quickly, like, people need to make their own decisions and help be part of the whole process, right? And you have to kind of usher that whole thing along. Did you experience something like that?
Ultimately, I, without any instruction at all, I had HR fill the form out.
Okay.
With no instruction.
And how'd that go?
At first, it went horribly.
Bombed, yeah.
It went horribly. But how do you make it intuitive? How do you put all your, the things that they have to do turn red as the next thing they have to go to? And it basically, you can make your form guide the user along. It doesn't slow anything down. It just takes them from point to point to point, and they just have to do that thing next. And then writing your notes on that can be, like if they forget something, a caution message comes up, or however you want to do that. By the way, all that stuff can go in a table too. All of that stuff. How to make the user aware that they need to wait for some calculations, or for some files to be written, or something. DriveWorks, you have to give it. DriveWorks does things instantly, but your network might not be that fast.
Yeah.
And you got to copy a file from South Carolina to Iowa. It's not going to happen instantly. So it needs, it needs to know you wrote a file, and now it needs to start looking at the directory you wrote it to and see when it shows up. So you start a timer, you stop a timer, you see the file's there. It answers a logical question. Does a file exist? You need the user to understand that takes a little bit of time. They just can't start clicking on what that file or whatever. How do you make the user understand that you can't do anything? Maybe you gray everything out for a little bit.
Right.
All of those things.
That all adds up. That all matter. They're all small isolated things, but together they create an experience that will ultimately dictate if your users use your tool or not.
Yeah.
Right. Because
if they get frustrated,
what are they going to do?
If they get, it might. No, that's not even it. That's not even it. It could work perfectly, but they don't know what to do next. And now it doesn't work perfectly. But if they took the right steps, it works. But they can't. It's new software. It's just like any other new software. You're literally writing software and presenting it to users. But if you think about it, you go on to Amazon Prime, you can get something ordered pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do it too many times to understand how to do it. Same kind of principle. You want things to present to the user so that they're guided through the experience, and it looks nice. It's that's something that the engineer might not put in there.
Find to be important.
Yeah.
Right.
It's all stuff in the original implementation. Those are all things that got touched on, worked on. And then I think in the original implementation and I'm very glad that we identified this thing's got to go into SQL. This thing's got to be a database.
Right, and that's, had your company used databases before for kind of day-to-day information, or like where did this stuff live before?
So our business system used SQL.
Okay.
And there was our IT manager could write crystal reports in and out of SQL, and he could get some things done by the data that was in our business system. You could get custom stuff out of there. It was not. Shouldn't say it wasn't possible. It was difficult to write to the business system.
Sure, because the business system's
needed
data is there to the benefit of the business system.
Right.
So ERP needs its data a certain way, and take it or leave it, right? And so if you have data or other insights that you need to go somewhere, there probably isn't a place to pack it into that business system database, right? So thus, it's got to live somewhere else. So before DriveWorks came around, and you had this not just a need, but the opportunity to actually start properly handling data, gathering it, storing it. Like, where did it live before? Again, is this like in the ether?
Yeah.
In an Excel file somewhere, in an email attachment? Like, literally,
Yeah.
that's where the data was.
Right.
And that's a little, think about it by now, like that's kind of scary, isn't it? I mean,
Right.
and so now at least it's in a place, and you can look at it and point to
Yeah.
it, and it's all there. Single source of truth. Like, all those things are now.
Yeah, and we learned to write out, thousands of lines of SQL records, tens of thousands, but they were static. They never changed. So it might have taken several minutes to create that table, but it only takes a second and a half to update the table with changes. And a lot of that stuff is historical, that you would have to go write a special report out of in Crystal to access that database. And it was coming now I have the data right there. I just write a query, and then, by the way, have that database update every 15 minutes to the changes in the business system, and I have a very active, accurate table of every job we've ever had, and then all the sub jobs and all the routings and all the I can access all that.
And you can extend that even further, because DriveWorks implementation can be put into a website. I mean, you could be on your mobile device across the world and access that same data through a nice looking interface, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're no longer bound by, well, what can I access? Like, oh, I have to go through Crystal, and I have to be on my work laptop to do that, to get there's all this stuff that starts to like really get in the way of having the right data in the right hands at the right time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so DriveWorks just kind of has a way of making all that easy, right?
Yeah, and by the way, having that salesperson writing something to a SQL database, that's scary all by itself. I mean, that sales guy is pretty darn smart, but he's not a SQL programmer.
Mm-hmm.
And you make a couple mistakes with your SQL tables, and you've got some big problems. So you can write a project in DriveWorks to make sure that the inputs
Handles all that
are
right.
correct for this database. So they can't make a bad input.
Mm-hmm.
They can't execute something that screws something up.
Right.
You can put all those checks in place.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have a manager view for SQL database editing that all of our managers can go into and add a customer, change their terms,
Mm-hmm.
update contacts, add a location, delete a location. It doesn't actually delete it just comments it out.
But you handle your data in like some form of like best practices environment. And by to do all that, I mean, you don't have a developer background, coding, database administration. That's not a previous skill set of yours,
No.
right? So you've kind of learned that on the fly as needed in concert with your DriveWorks journey. So I don't know if I have a question there or not, but I mean, what's your take on, what I like to say is, if I can do it, anyone can do it. I mean, would you kind of say the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, ChatGPT is my friend.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
If I need to know a command, then I'll just simply verbalize what I'm looking for, and it'll get me close. And then the nice thing about DriveWorks is you're in an environment where you can go to your Z holding page and check out whether the thing works or not. You can write tools that tells you real time whether it worked.
Furthermore, I imagine you have like a development environment and then your production environment, so you have a space where you can feel totally at ease to not really screw anything up.
You will have a development environment, a test environment, and a production environment.
Right.
And you will have your sacred group of people that will test your stuff after you develop it, and then once they've blessed it and you're brave enough to put it out to production, then you will kick it out to your production implementation that the company uses. So you will live in 3 different worlds. It's easy to bounce between the 3. It's not hard, but you will learn software development vernacular. You'll start to use all of that stuff. You will be a changed person.
Yeah. But so for folks who are listening that don't exactly know what we're talking about, a lot of this probably sounds pretty technical. Gee, I've never touched SQL before. I don't know anything about databases.
SQL's one animal. I think I do 4 things in SQL. And they're always, the syntax is pretty much always the same. Yeah. I'm accessing a field. I'm searching a database by that field. I'm returning some piece of data. That's a query. Executing, I'm taking a piece of information and I'm writing it to a record. I'm checking to see if the record exists. If it's not, it creates a new record. I use that one all the time. So I know what I need to know. If I don't, I have a contact that I can that I can use, or I can try ChatGPT if I needed to. But that's one thing. But the other is the rule builder in DriveWorks. If you have good command of Excel functions, writing an FX in Excel, you're pretty
good shape, right?
You're in pretty good shape because it's very conversational. There's just a few. There's a few idiosyncrasies. You need to refresh. Refreshing isn't a thing that's in your head all the time, but you do something to a table and you're already displaying the table, and then you just did something to that table. Maybe you should refresh that table to the thing you just did, and you need to automate that so that as soon as you enter something here, that table will refresh, and now it shows your new inputs. Right. Those are things that you're not used to in Excel because you're not doing something that changes a table. You have to go and put it in there. You're not doing that here. You're working someplace else, and then something else has to react to that.
Yeah. The analogy that I often use to describe what using DriveWorks is like to prospective users is I consider it like the Home Depot, right? So DriveWorks is, at the end of the day, nothing but a bunch of tools, right? So if your goal is to build a custom house, you can go to Home Depot and basically get everything you need. Pick your favorite hardware store, right? You can get your lumber, nails, you can rent a truck to get all the materials home. You can get wire, literally everything you need to accomplish your custom end game is there. Now, if you seek to build a custom home, but you've never hammered a nail in before, maybe you shouldn't be building your own home. But if you've done some side projects, you know how to screw 2x4s together, then you're in a good position to at least get started. Now, will you want to do all your own plumbing? Maybe not. Are you comfortable with electrical? Maybe not. There's aspects that could not everyone will come into this environment knowing everything they need to know, right? And so that's just something that we all accept and just work our way through. And so, how did you? You've had to learn a lot of things along the way. Is it?
I think so. I'm thinking back to the beginning, and you wrote I'm just looking up into space, trying to remember. I recall you writing an image creation project where it opened up a CAD model, snapped a bunch of pictures, named the pictures.
We resized them.
We resized
moved
them.
the white space.
Exactly.
We did all sorts of fun things.
We did a lot of cool things. And I had a group of interns open up. I want to say I had 1,500 CAD models, and I had 6 interns, and they opened them up and they named them they named them for length, width, and height. We had a naming convention, and then the type of material the mold was built out of, and there was some other information. But we renamed all of those files, so I knew by the name of the file the
programmatically known what was inside.
Right, to the closest half inch.
Right.
And then we had all these different pictures where I could search by the size of the part, and I could get a picture of every part that we've ever built within, and then we had a drop down for within 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, so I could see everything we've ever built that size, and I could instantly get a job number of what that was, and then I could bring up the information for that mold. I mean, it was a kind of a sanity check thing, but I think you wrote that and delivered that, and it worked. And I used that not only for those 1,500, but then we did all the slides, all the lifters, all the cavity lifters. We did every component in the molds, and we built that same kind of thing. By me using what you had written, I just extrapolated and used a lot of those same rules, and I learned by doing that.
Right. So it's kind of like, back to my Home Depot analogy, maybe we were the electrical contractor.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to mess around with that, or I don't have the time. I can't watch YouTube videos all day long to figure out how to wire. Let's bring someone in to handle this part of it. And by the way, once it's done, since I watched that electrical contractor do his thing, I'm like, oh, I get it. I could probably do that myself the next time. I'm feeling brave enough, and I know how to shut the circuit breaker off and all these things, and I think you can start to piece it together.
And I think back too is when we would be on Teams meetings and we were debugging or troubleshooting something, how often you just threw up the DriveWorks documentation and bam, the whole and examples of everything are right there, and I don't remember going to the DriveWorks documentation that much until I saw how much you went to it, and now it stays open now. Right. Now I just have it there all the time, and even for things, it's I get a kick out of using a piece of functionality for not its intended use. I kind of like that, for setting the visibility of something, maybe using a tool that you wouldn't think, but lo and behold, it works to set visibility.
Right. You can reuse it.
And I can reuse it and variabilize it and copy it to some other projects. Sure. And, ultimately I use the documentation all the time. And there's a lot of content out there too that you can take a look at how it was done.
So changing gears a little bit, now that you're a couple years into it, you've got the benefit of a lot of experience and history, and you've seen the twists and turns yourself. If you were to start over today, knowing what you know now, what would have been different? What would you do differently? Different approach? Like what?
I would have been much more. Focused on SQL table creation. I would have understood that create a lot more fields, maybe just name them an alphanumeric name.
Have them be there?
Okay. So you didn't have to go and update tables.
So is that just a form of planning?
Yeah. I would have.
Well, probably that blended with, once you got involved with SQL, I think you started to appreciate data more.
Oh, right.
It's.
I would have variabilized everything that I used. I would have created a template project that had all of these things already in it. I would have identified macros that I write almost every project, and I would have put them in that template, and variables in that template, and constants in that template. I would have really I really would have concentrated on infrastructure much. It came, I have these things now, but it came, I think it probably took me 6-9 months to realize that
This data is
it's
a
big
thing.
and oh, by the way, test table, test group sets of data. You write something and you have to fill out 17 fields in your form to test that 18th thing. Well, just write something that fills in all those things for you.
It's
and
a time-saving development tool.
Yeah, put some secret squirrel button someplace that automatically fills everything that's only in your dev group, and it all those things can save you time. I think those are some things that I wish I would have paid attention to, and it's not that you didn't tell me, it's I didn't know to give it the credence that it deserved.
I think that's a pretty common experience, because it's something that, like DriveWorks, that it kind of causes a company or individuals in a company to you have this newfound ability to gather data, manipulate it, do something with it. Like, when else in your career have you had your hands actually on data?
Yeah.
And you're like, what's this data stuff? What do I do with it? That's a fairly new thing for most folks who are taking on something like DriveWorks for the first time.
I think another thing that I should have done more assertively from the beginning was communicate scope creep more assertively in senior management meetings, because as we learned all the other things that this thing can do and all the stuff, we really did lose sight of some of the original scope items,
right,
because this is something that has a valuable impact right now. We can use this today, and those are all good things, and I would have done them, but what I didn't do is I didn't adjust delivery dates on the original scope items, because I did these other 3 things. I really needed to do a better job. So communicating your progress and how things are changing and evolving, and letting people that are working concurrently with you understand what your deliverable dates are, because ultimately getting this thing into the hands of users, that's the prize. That's the end goal, is to get people to start using this thing. But if you keep adding and adding and adding, you'll just never get to that spot where it's done. It's always in a state of addition. It's a thing to roll out your improvements. You take a look at, you get an update on your iOS pretty often, but take a look at how things roll out in the real world.
Yeah.
Have an idea or a schedule.
Back to my Home Depot analogy. I mean, if you, with your implementation, let's say you set out to cut wood. Well, and you don't know what you don't know yet. But what you do know is that I've used handsaws before. Like, oh yeah, I can go to Home Depot and get a handsaw. And then a couple weeks in, you're like, oh, there's a skill saw. Why don't we use that instead? Like, oh, hold on, there's a chop saw. Well, here's a miter saw that does bevels and has a laser. Oh, here's a table saw that I can do even and so scope creep. What's my question? You shouldn't close your eyes to doing things differently and better, right? But how is that a distraction when you do that, or is that actually progress? So how do you?
I think
deal with that dynamic.
It's both. I mean,
you got to go back.
Here's
to your boss.
the thing. Here's the part about not knowing everything that it could do. You know, if I could wave a magic wand and know everything that DriveWorks could do that first month, I would have rewritten the scope.
Right.
You know, before it even got, you know, before a schedule even got created.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't, and until you start using it and you start looking at your company's process, your internal process, and you identify, you know, areas where mistakes are made or people are waiting on an internal customer, both upstream and downstream, and how information flows. And you look at that and you're like, I could eliminate that problem like today.
Right.
Like right now, I can if I spend 45 minutes, I can have that email going to that person automatically if they just push this button.
Yep.
And those things are,
so that's a real value gain. That's good.
yeah.
And so we wouldn't call it a distraction.
You know,
like what you originally set out to do.
Well, you know, I'm working X hours a day, and I just took 45 minutes out of that to do something else. And no, by the way, now I got to go train them on how to use it.
Mm-hmm.
And it does those little things, even if it's such a simple little thing. And now I have to roll it to test and have them try to break it, and then roll it out to production. Those are all things you have to do to keep everything up to date.
Right.
So little nuggets of improvement. I did learn to hold on to them and release, you know, X number of cool things at once.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did become more disciplined with that.
Yeah. So there's the notion of project management is strong with this, right?
Yeah. And then you've got your users, especially your test users, that have great ideas. You know, I got one Monday, and I'm like, you know, yeah, of course he needs that. But that one's a little bit more involved, but I can do it. But it's gonna have to step in to some, you know, it's gonna push something out to do it. But I called the director of sales and the COO, and they're like, we don't have that now? I'm like,
it's
no.
so obvious now that you say it.
No,
Yeah.
no, we don't. We have to go in and you have to go into Encompass and pull all that information out manually, one routing thing at a time.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a request to get what is this thing cost today? Where are we at in the manufacturing process, and how many hours do we have in it? How much money do we have in it? What are we at right up to the moment?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, of course you need to know that. If you want to know if your project's on schedule or not, you need to know. You need to be able to type in a job number and have a dashboard come up.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, I mean, DriveWorks is the thing that enables you to tackle all these things.
Mm-hmm.
It's this collection. Like at the end of the day, your implementation will be the collection of 1,000 improvements.
Yeah.
A little here, a little there, and you start to build that up, and it turns itself into one mega improvement. So that's great, but I think it sounds like the lesson learned or the advice to heed for folks in the future is that's great and all, but you still have to manage the act of taking advantage of all of that.
Yeah.
Right. And you set some kind of plan. The plan can change, but make sure that things proceed in an orderly and planned manner.
And I would identify the things that take the most administrative time, the things that you repeat, that are monotonous, that happen every job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of companies say, you know, I can't open a job for less than $300. You know, those are my administrative costs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it seems to me like that's $300 every job that if you could automate it, you just add $300 every job.
Right.
And I don't know, you know, you do 1,500 jobs a year.
Yeah, adds up.
It's a thing.
But just to, I think, point out again, like if we rewind the DriveWorks journey all the way back to when you were evaluating it, I mean, that did start as CAD automation. Like,
Yes, it did.
I would like to save some of my engineers' time on drawings.
Yep.
And now it turns out that while you do all those things too, maybe you can answer this in terms of like percent of time, like as far as the time that where you have focused your energy in implementing, what percent ended up being specifically CAD related, and how much wasn't?
Today?
Yeah. Is it like 90?
I was going to say 10-12% CAD.
Yeah.
And the rest administration, data management.
And it's not to minimize what gains can be made in the CAD space,
Yeah.
but once you start to really take account of this newfound capability to manage data, build workflows, have a process, and everything's got guardrails, and it all just kind of works. That capability can extend basically anywhere inside of a company.
Right.
Right.
And then you start writing, dashboards for your managers so that all their information is at their fingertips for their reports and for their direct reports, for how their department's doing, so that they just start managing better.
Mm-hmm.
They see instantly where things are going awry.
Mm-hmm.
And then nobody wants to be in a meeting with their boss and not know what's going on, or
Yeah.
what are the potential downfalls. Where are we at today?
Yeah. So maybe just one final thread here. Where do you see things going forward? What kind of ideas do you have? What are the plans of the future? What's like the next level stuff?
I think wow, I didn't see that one coming. There's so many, we keep a list going. People are pretty good at this now. I have a feedback project where they can send me stuff that they would like to have, or when something's broken that they can't figure something out, they can take a screenshot and it comes to me. But there are more dashboards to build. I think that I would like to implement some different CS.
You said like improve the UI, like
Yeah.
the styling.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
CSS. Sure.
Yes, just have a global type of thing that for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, I can turn my website pink if I want to. I mean, they're subtle little things, but they're things that make an outward facing portal look really sharp and look more professional.
That may seem like kind of random to the listeners, like, okay, cool idea, but why do you really want to? Why is your mind even going there? And I think that's because by now, certainly in the future, I mean, DriveWorks will end up being perhaps the system that they spend most of their time in during the day. Right. So it's if someone's going to spend the majority of their time in one piece of software or one website is really what they're doing, like let's make it good, right? And
I'll go to one of your analogies and it, about construction, and I'll preface this with the thought that I would encourage every young manager or whatever, just take as many plant tours as you possibly can. See everything, even out of your industry, as much as you can, because in construction, if you go onto a construction site and it is immaculate, there's no trash, the bins are being emptied, the portalets are fresh, and it's a clean site. It means they're doing the little things. You go onto a website and it is fresh, clean. It does these little things. You can be pretty sure that if they're paying attention to the little things, big things are getting handled.
right. Yeah.
and it's important. You know, your plant should be immaculate all the time. I was lucky enough to take a tour with Dr. MSI, the founder of Toyota Systems.
Oh, yeah?
And he walked into a plant and turned around and walked out. He said, "I've seen all I need to see.
Yep.
It's filthy." And that was that was his. They paid this guy to come see their plant, and that was his. He says, "Your plant's filthy."
Yeah. Well, I don't need to spend any more time here.
I
I already
need to
know what I
spend-
need to know.
I,
Right.
I know what I need to know. You're not doing the little things right. And you know, I feel bad for companies that you know, they're dirty by nature.
Mhm.
They're out there, but you can also tell that you know, those places. I've toured a plant that makes 55-gallon drums, and that was not a entirely clean plant, but you could see the effort that they were making to make it clean. And you know, I walked away saying, they're trying.
Yeah.
They're trying.
Yeah, perhaps another way to look at it is back to my custom home. You're going to build this custom home and like not put siding on it and not paint it and put your shutters up and put your address on the front, like
All the little things.
you're going to go all this way and not do the thing that might actually matter the most, you know. And so probably just a different way of saying that. And yeah, if you're going to a potential buyer for said home, and the thing like what else is wrong with this if the things that I can see right off are not right.
Right.
And so
You know, take some time and develop your website, make it look. You've got great examples on your computer right now of what good programs look like, and they're intuitive. You know, that little X in the top right hand corner closes things. Start there. You know, make it look. Make it look like they're used to seeing. Use icons. There's great places to go get icons, and great places to go get you know, stylized buttons and things, and pick a theme and build something you can be proud of.
yeah, I agree. Well, we've been at it for a little while here. Any other topics or threads or comments to throw out there before we wrap up?
It was easy saying yes to do this. I'm a big fan of DriveWorks. I'm a big fan of TPM, and I would every customer, every business is going to be different, and they're going to make their decisions that are best for them. I think understanding that TPM knows that's exactly what you're going to do.
I will say every implementation that I've been witnessed has been unique, totally different.
Yeah.
You know, so some of our customers don't even have CAD or don't even like actually manufacture a product, yet they still want to take advantage of all that. A lot of that, everything else of what DriveWorks can do is still very powerful in and of itself. So,
and I would also tell any prospective company that your senior management has to want this.
That's true.
Senior management has to want this. If my company, the senior management wanted it, it's been a pleasure. I can't imagine if anybody didn't want it. It would have been brutal. You know, information's hard enough to get from people that want to help you. Right. Yeah, I can't imagine trying to get information from people that didn't want to. Right. So that's a I highly recommend that.
All right. Well, thanks again, Kevin, for your time. To all the listeners, thanks for tuning in and hearing what he has to say. A real great look at a day in the life of kind of a real world rundown of what the DriveWorks journey is all about and how it can go. You know, benefits, trials and tribulations. I mean, it's all there. So thanks for the full expose of sorts of your experience. And I think a lot of other folks out there will benefit from hearing what you have to say.